All right, so what's up, everyone? Welcome to, I guess, the second part of week two for Intro to Backend. And today we're going to be doing a demo kind of similar to last week of kind of like a to-do app. We're going to have like tasks that we have to do. They're going to have like a description and like a done field, which is basically going to be like whether or not you've done this sort of task. And yeah. So the starter code's on the website. If y'all haven't downloaded that already, please be sure to do so. So I have it up right here. So I'm just gonna do I'm gonna open this. So go to new terminal folder, and then the open VS Code, I could just use the code dot shortcut, and then VS Code should be opened right up here. There we go. There we go. All right, we're good. We're good. All right. So yeah, so basically right here, we've got a file structure that looks similar to what we had in the last demo. So we have app.py over here, and we have all these endpoints over here. So like get tasks, create task, get task, update, and delete task. But then we also have this db.py file over here, which we'll explain right now. This is a little bit different from our previous demo. So I guess what we're going to start with is the imports up here. So full screen. Oh yeah, you're right. Okay. All right, yeah. So what we've got here is import OS. OS is going to be the stuff that's going to be in your operating system on your local computer. So whether that be like files or environmental variables, which is something that we'll cover later on. This is what we're importing over here, and it's going to be pretty useful on, I guess, right now and then later in the course as well. And then we're also importing SQLite 3 because we'll be using SQLite commands to query our database over here. And so, yeah, that's what those two imports do here. And next is this singleton function, which to kind of explain that, we're going to first like kind of explain the database driver. So the database driver is an object that basically represents your entire database. And we only ever want one instance of our database running at a time because our database kind of contains all of our information. We don't want to have like a bunch of different databases running on our computer at the same time. So what the singleton function essentially does is it makes it so that when we plug in database equals singleton database driver, we only have one instance of our database ever running. So this is why we have all this stuff over here. And yeah, so we're going to be starting with this db.py file because what we're essentially going to be doing is we're going to be creating our tables within this file. So then once we have like all of our, I guess, structure, then we're going to write the routes in app.py to kind of query, or not query, but access the information within the database. So whether it be getting, creating, updating, or deleting a task, those endpoints are kind of, I guess, referencing this database over here. So this is why we generally start off with creating like our database file, and then we implement the routes in app.py. So first, we're going to set up a connection with the database. So we're going to go to this init function right here, and we're going to see that this is kind of going to initialize our database driver object. So we're going to have some documentation over here, and this is going to secure a connection with the database, and it's going to store it into the instance variable on. Oh, I need to turn off Copilot. Let's do that. All right, there we go. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to do self.con equals SQLite3.connect. And so the first field over here is going to be the name of the database file. And since we're creating a to-do kind of app, we're just going to name this to-do.db. And then the second field we're going to have over here is check same thread equals false. And setting this field false prevents us from making multiple edits to the database at the same time. There's benefits of setting this to true, but for the scope of the course, we're just going to set this to false for now. And yeah, so when we connect to the database, what's the first thing we're going to want to do? We kind of have this like empty database file, right? We don't really have anything in it, but we want to actually start using it for our app. So the first thing we're probably going to want to do is like create our table, which is going to like represent part of our database because we're going to be trying to create, because the database, multiple tables represent a database, not just one table. So yeah, so we're going to create the table, and what we're going to do is make this function called create table task, and this is going to represent like our task table in a sense. So we do create task table. It's going to take itself as a parameter, and then using SQL is going to create a task table. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to use SQLite 3 commands that we just ran through in the terminal on Monday to kind of create this, I guess, table over here. So the way to like execute, I guess, SQL commands with the given packages that we have, we're going to do self.con.execute. And then over here in these, I guess, 3 strings over here, this is going to be a doc string. And whatever we have here, we can basically execute like raw SQL in here. So if I want to create this table over here, what I can literally do is just create table task. And if you guys remember, these are the keywords for creating a table over here. So the first field we're going to have, or that we're going to want to have in our table, is like a unique identifier, right? This is going to be our ID field. So we're going to have ID, integer, primary key, auto increment. Again, the integer just means it's an integer. The primary key means that it's the unique identifier. And the auto increment just means that whenever you add something new to this task table, its ID is going to be 1 more than the previously added item. So now that we have this, we're going to have a comma, and then we get to the next field. So in our task table, we're going to want to have 3 things: the ID, the description of the task that we're going to want to be completing, and whether or not it's done. So the next field over here is going to be description. And if you guys remember, the text is kind of the string equivalent in SQL. So we're just going to have text not null, since we're going to want every single task to have some sort of description. And then the last field is going to be done. And this is going to be a Boolean because it's either true or false. And again, it's going to be not null because we want to know whether our tasks are done or not. And then we end our SQL query over here with a semicolon. And then something important over here is that we're going to want to have these 2 keywords over here, if not exists. And the reason we're going to want to have this is because, like, if we didn't have these keywords and we tried rerunning the file multiple times, this table task will already exist if we have already ran it before. So if you think about a database, right, it's the whole point of databases is data persistence. So you want, like, when your file stops running and when you rerun it, you want it to like persist, right? But if this table already persists and you're trying to create a new table over here that's named the same thing as a table that already exists, is going to throw a bunch of errors. So that's why we want to have these if not exists keywords over here, so that when we run it, if the table does indeed exist already, then no errors are going to be thrown and we just reuse the previous data that we already had. So, and yeah, so that's going to be over here. And yeah, and then good practice, I guess, when creating, and we're creating tables in general, we're going to want to have like a delete task table function as well. It's just good practice to have. So we're just going to do delete task table. It's going to take itself as a parameter, and using SQL, this will delete a task table. And then again, we're going to do self.con.execute, and this will execute like raw SQL. So we have our doc string over here. And yeah, so does anyone remember how to like delete a table in SQL? Does anyone remember the keywords for, I guess, deleting a table? It's close. So that's deleting data from a table. So to actually like delete an entire table, it's drop table. So what we're going to do is we're going to have drop table if exists task. And the reason why we're going to want to have like if exists, just so that we're not trying to like delete a table if it like doesn't exist, because that's going to throw some errors as well. So yeah, so now that we have these 2 things over here, yeah, now we can start kind of creating functions that will kind of query our database over here. So yeah, so now this whole thing is set up. So then we're gonna go over here. And so the first thing we're probably going to want to do is have some sort of function that like gets all tasks from our database, right? So we're going to have this function get all tasks. It's going to take itself parameter and using SQL returns all the tasks. All right, so yeah, again, we're going to be calling self.con.execute, and we'll have the SQL command select all from tasks as like a string, right? Because that's how you query like everything from a database. So what we're going to do, self.con.execute, and we're going to do select all from table task. And so now we have this thing over here, right? But this is some sort of object, and we need to store this object in some sort of variable, and we're going to call this thing cursor. And the reason why we call it cursor is if you think about a database, or I guess a table in general, the table has like rows and columns that's similar to like an Excel spreadsheet, right? And if you notice in Excel, you can like kind of highlight different cells with your mouse cursor if you like drag it from the top left and kind of highlight all the way down. And so this is kind of why we named this thing cursor, because it kind of represents we're selecting, I guess, specific things from like our Excel table in a sense. So we have this variable cursor. And so this thing is going to be like a 2D array, right? Because the Excel spreadsheet is kind of like a 2D array. But this object is not Python interpretable, and we have to convert it so that it's, I guess, interpretable in Python. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to have an empty tasks list over here. And so this is going to represent like the tasks that we eventually want to return. So we have this empty list, and somehow we're going to want to extract this information from cursor and put it in the tasks over here. So the way we're going to do this is, so for row in cursor, so that's basically saying for each row, for each entry in our cursor object, we're going to do tasks.append. And so this is just going to be the different attributes that a task has. So the first thing is going to be an ID. And this is going to correspond to like the first, I guess, column in the row. So this is going to be row 0. Then we're going to have a description. And this is going to be row of 1. And then done is going to be row of 2. And yeah, so now that we've iterated through all of the entries in our cursor object, we're going to return this tasks object right here. And yeah, so that completes like the whole, I guess, get all tasks thing over here. So yeah, so now that we have this like function over here, we can now implement the route that kind of references this function in here. So we're going to go to app.py real quick, and we're going to explain, I guess, these imports over here. So again, we're importing JSON, which is kind of the return type that we're going to be sending and receiving data from. And then Flask is just the framework that we're using. And then we're also importing this like request thing that allows us to like get data from a request body. So let's go to get tasks over here. And yeah. Okay. Okay. And then one thing we also have to add under this app equals Flask name is we're going to have db equals db.database driver. And this is allowing us to use the functions in this file over here, db. So what we're actually going to have to do, which I forgot to do, is we're going to have to import db, which is this database file over here. So then when we do db equals db.database driver, this essentially allows us to use this database driver class. And now I realize that this is indented one over. So we're going to have to tab this. Tab that. Yeah. All right. Okay. So now let's write this route for get tasks. So this is going to be the endpoint for getting all tasks. And so we can essentially write this in one line of code. And so since we already have a function over here that kind of gets all the tasks for us, we just simply have to call it, right? So we're just going to do return JSON.dumps tasks, which is kind of like, or we're going to return this in a dictionary format. And so we have the tasks, I guess, key over here. And then all the tasks that we have, we're just going to do db.get all tasks over here. So yeah, and then if this is successful, which it probably should be, we're just going to put a 200 over here, and that's going to be the success response code. So let's see if we can actually run this and test this on Postman. So yeah, I did. Oh, thanks. All right. So let's create the virtual environment. Might take a second to load. Okay, there we go. Then we activate it. And then let's try running it. Okay. Oh, okay. I have to install the requirements. Okay. Okay, now it's running. So let's go over to Postman and see if we can indeed get all tasks. And we'll know if this will be successful is if we get like an empty list, right? Because there's no tasks in our database right now. So we're going to go over to Postman over here. We're on our local host and let's try get all tasks. Hoping this works. Okay. No table task exists. Okay. All right, so there's probably something wrong with in our db.py. Let's see. Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. So over here, in our init function, if we, I guess, call this create task table over here. So we're going to do self.create task table. And what this essentially is going to do is it's going to run this function over here, and we're going to have our task table created. So theoretically now, we send this in, we should have an empty list over here with tasks. All right. So now we know that our get all tasks function works. So I guess the next logical thing is we're going to want to insert some stuff into this database, right? Or else it's not really going to be that useful. So the next thing we're going to want to do is create some sort of tasks, right? So we're going to over here, create tasks, or no, we're going to go to db.py, and we're going to have a function that creates different tasks. So now what we're going to do is we're going to define insert task table. And so we're going to have three fields. We're going to have itself as a parameter, a description of like what the task is going to be, and then the done field. So again, using SQL inserts a task into a task table. All right. So then again, we're going to do self.con.execute, and we're going to insert some data into here. So again, the SQL command for inserting data is insert into table task. We're going to have description and done. And then we're going to have some values in here. And so we're going to have this weird syntax, which I'll explain in a bit. So yeah, so the syntax after the values keyword is a bit different. And instead of writing the actual values in, we have placeholders that are like a tuple of question marks. So in Python, like a tuple is like something with parentheses, and then it's field separated by commas. So this thing right here is a tuple. And this is going to represent the number of parameters that we have. So since we have two parameters coming in into our function, this self thing doesn't matter over here. We're going to have description and done. So this is what these two, I guess, things are going to represent over here. So then after we end the SQL query, we're going to have a comma right here. And then we're going to have description and then done. So this is basically saying is that we're inserting into task our description and done. And then this description over here corresponds to this question mark here. And likewise for done, it represents this thing over here. And now we've done that, let me make this not into a doc string. I guess it doesn't get a doc string. All right, there we go. All right. So now that we've made some sort of change to the database, but the way I guess databases work is that you have to save these changes. So what we're going to do here is we're going to have this command called self.con.commit. And what this basically does, it's again the equivalent of like saving information in a database. So for example, when you commit something on GitHub, you're saving some sort of files, right? And the commit function here just saves the changes that we made in our database over here since we inserted something new. So we're gonna have this over here. And then what we're gonna store this over here into a variable called cursor again. And then what we're gonna want to return is cursor. And then there's this special attribute it has called last row ID. And what basically this means is that it's going to return the last row of this cursor object. Even though the cursor object is technically like one line, it was still necessary to have this thing over here for syntax purposes. So yeah, now that we've created some sort of way to insert stuff using SQL, now let's write a route to it so we can actually call this function. So we're going to go over here to create task. And so the first thing I guess we're going to want to have is a body, right? And then we're going to load some sort of data from a request, right? So this is over here. And then the description going to be body.get description. Done is going to be body.get done. And then, yeah. So then now we're going to have task ID equals, and then we're going to call, I guess, our insert task table function over here. So db.insert task table. This is going to be description, and then done. Okay. So, yeah. Okay, yeah. So we're going to have like a task ID being returned from this function. And this is going to represent like the task ID of our new task that's being inserted. And so I guess the way we're going to want to check if this succeeded, is if the table indeed contains this sort of task ID, right? But right now we don't have a way to like get a task by its ID. If the task exists, like we're going to want to return a success response, right? But if it doesn't exist, we're going to return an error. But we have no way of determining this since we haven't implemented this get task function. So I guess we're going to, pause right here for this one. And then we have to implement this get task function. And once we implement this, we can return it back here and indeed see if like something was created. So we're going to go to get task by ID. So yeah, let's create a function here. And so the one parameter that it's going to take is going to be the task ID, because that's the thing that we're searching for, right? So using SQL, so get task by its ID. Okay, so again, the way to execute SQL commands are self.con.execute. And so we're going to do select all from our table task. And then we can have this like where keyword where we can specify some sort of condition, right? So we're going to have where the ID is equal to something, but we don't know what the something is yet, right? So we have a question mark. So we end this over here. We have a comma, and then we have our task ID over here. And I forgot there actually needs to be a self as a parameter here. Okay. And yeah, and after this, I guess, task ID over here, it's necessary to have a comma because this thing over here is a tuple, and a tuple, this is not a tuple over here. If you want a tuple, you have to have a comma in here. So this is why we have this comma syntax here. Okay, so we have some sort of, I guess, object being returned from this, right? So we're just going to store this in cursor. And then same thing over here. We can iterate through this cursor object very similarly to what we did here. And yeah, so for row and cursor, we're going to return, since there's only one row in cursor, we can just simply return it, ID, and that's going to be the first, I guess, entry of our row. The description is going to be the second entry. And the done field is going to be our third entry over here. Okay. And so now, if there's nothing in here, it's not going to like return anything, right? If there's no row and cursor, if this thing doesn't find anything, then it's just going to bypass this whole for loop, right? So then in that instance, we're going to return none. And so that's going to represent if we don't find anything in our table. So now let's go back to app.py and finish creating this create task function over here. So now we have our task ID, and now we have a way to check if this task was indeed created. So what we can do over here is have task equals db dot get task by ID, and we just plug in our task ID over here. And so now we check if our task is none, which means we didn't find anything. We return some sort of error. So json.dumps error task not found. Oh, okay. And if it indeed found something, then we're going to want to return the task that we just created to see that we actually created it. So we're going to do json.dumps. We're just going to do task, and then the response code of 201, which means it was created right. And then over here, we're going to have a response code of 400, which means something went wrong during creation. So let's go to Postman, and now we can test if our create task function actually works. So we've got this create new task request over here. Again, this is a post method, and we have all these settings over here. You go to body and then raw, and then this is all JSON stuff. So let's say I'm doing algo homework and I need to submit it, right? So say I haven't submitted it yet, we can change this to false. Okay, so we see that a new task object has been returned to us, has ID1, has description, the same thing over here, and done is 0. The way, I guess, Python interprets false, it interprets it as 0, and so this is why it's returning 0 over here. So this is all a good sign. So now we know how to create tasks. Let's see if we can actually get a task by its ID. Let's see if we can try to, I guess, get this specific ID 1 over here. So let's create a new task, another one. Let's do like, let's do like, I don't know, go exercise. Okay, so now we have ID 2, and if we do get all tasks, okay. So this thing doesn't work. Okay. Okay, I spelled the pen wrong. All right, there we go. Yeah. Okay, there we go. So we see that we have our 2 tasks over here, and now we're going to want to get this individual one. So now to do that, we're going to go to app.py, and we're going to fill in this route. So forget task. Okay, so we have our task is db dot get task by ID, right? And we just pass in our task ID. If our task is none, we can basically just copy this thing over here. And if we do this, then this essentially just gives us the same functionality. It's like creating the task, right? If we found it, then if we didn't find it, we just return an error. And if we did find it, we just return the task with the correct response code. Except these are going to be 200 and this is going to be 404 because we're searching for like a task, right? So the 404 is not found and 200 means we actually found something. So let's go to get task by ID. Let's see if we can hit something. Okay. I don't think it's running. Terminal. not send request. Oh, okay, wrong port. Okay, yeah. So we see that in our get all tasks, right? If we hit this, we see we have two tasks. But if you do get task by ID and we specify ID of 1 here, we see that we have this ID of 1 over here. We can check on the logs here as well. This thing was hit successfully. So the next thing we want to do is, I guess, update a task, right? So let's go to our db.py and create the function for our database that's going to allow us to update a task. So we're going to do find update task by ID. It's going to take itself as a parameter and then some sort of description, a done field, and an ID field as well, because we want to know which task we want to update, right? So we're going to go over here. So using SQL is going to update a task in our table. So again, we do self.con.execute. And so the way to do this is to update table task, and we set the description equal to a question mark. We set done equal to another question mark. And then we set, and then on the condition where our ID is equal to something. So then we go over here, and then we have our tuple again, which is going to compose of our description, our done, and our ID parameters in here. And so, yeah, that basically creates that. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to save this change into our database, because if we don't, then it's not going to actually do anything. So we're going to commit this change using self.con.commit. And so now we just go back to app.py and we get to implement this route over here. So is going to be the endpoint for updating the task. So we have our body equals json.loads request.data. We're going to want to extract the information from this. So description equals body.get description. Done equals body.get done. And then since we have our task ID up here, we can just now call this new function that we just created. So it's going to be task equals db.update task by ID. We have our description, our done, and our task ID. And then now what we're going to want to do is see if like this task exists, right? So if this task ID doesn't exist, then if we go over here, it's not really going to do anything. So what we're going to want to do is have, if our task is none, so if this thing didn't find anything, so it's not updating anything, if our task is none, we return that some sort of error was not found. So json.dumps error task not found. And then if it indeed is something, we just do return json.dumps for task and then status code 200. So let's see if this thing indeed works. So we go over the Postman and let's go to update task by ID. And so let's see, let's check what it actually says. I think it's submit algo homework, right? So let's change it to like, I don't know, submit 3410 homework. So we're going to go over here, our body, submit 3410. And let's say I actually did it, and let's set it to true. All right, cannot send request. Run it again. Let's see. Okay, oh, wrong port. Okay, syntax error near where. Okay, there we go. So task not found. Okay. Okay. That's weird. Let's see. Okay, yeah, you're right. You're right. Okay. So what he basically said is that this, I guess, update task by ID doesn't return anything. So if we're doing task equals this, our task is automatically going to be none. So then just go over here, and what I was, I guess, trying to do is, so we're going to do task equals db dot get task by ID. And if the task is none, we return task not found. And it's probably better if we have this up here, just so that we don't want to be querying anything like bad. So let's have this up here, and let's try running it again and see what happens. Okay, all right, so that's fine. Let's do update task. Oh, turned off. That's weird. Is that fine? Okay. Oh, all right, there we go. Yeah. Okay. So get all tasks. Let's try to, I guess, update to something else. Um, just some sort of gibberish over here. And we go update task. We see that is not good. Yeah, that's not good. Okay. Oh, okay. I know what's going on. All right. Okay, yeah. So if we're updating this over here, what I did was I moved this back down. And so this is basically doing, it updates it, and then it gets the new task over here, getting the task by ID. And yeah. So then the last thing we have to do is delete some sort of task, right? So if we go to F delete task by ID, and then this is just going to take itself and some sort of ID, right? So then we're going to have over here using SQL, this deletes a task in our table. So over here, the way to delete some stuff from a table in SQL is we're going to do self.con.execute. And so we're just going to do delete from task where our ID is equal to question mark. And then this is going to be just the ID and that. So then now we go to our app.py, and we first check if this task actually exists. So if we go task equals db dot get task by ID, we supply the task ID. If our task is none, and we return json.dumps, error, task not found. And then if it indeed exists, what we're going to do is just simply say db dot delete task by ID. And this is just going to be the task ID. And then we're going to return the task that we just deleted. So we're just going to do json.dumps task. And then the response code, I think it was like 202. I don't exactly remember. All right, so let's see if this delete task actually works. Okay, wrong port again. Okay, so it returns something, which is good. So then if we go to our get all tasks, and we see that our task has been deleted, right? So let's try it again. Let's try and delete ID of 2, and we delete this. It returned good. So then if we get all tasks, there's nothing in our task table. So I guess that implements everything. We have our, I guess, create, retrieve, update, delete. Everything here is implemented. And so we basically just did all 4, or I guess all 5 CRUD endpoints for, I guess, our task database. So I guess that's all we had today. Sorry for a bunch of errors again on my part. But yeah, so let's move on to the Kahoot now.